When people talk about the Xbox 360 era, the conversation usually revolves around massive AAA releases like Halo 3, Gears of War, Mass Effect, Call of Duty, or huge digital successes like Castle Crashers, Braid, and Shadow Complex. But one thing that often gets overlooked about the Xbox 360 generation is just how important Xbox Live Arcade became for retro gaming preservation. During that era, companies were finally starting to realize there was real value in making older games accessible again digitally. Some publishers handled that responsibility better than others, and honestly, Sega was one of the companies that at least tried to do more than simply dump ROMs onto a storefront and call it a day. That brings us to Sega Vintage Collection Monster World on Xbox 360, a collection that, even back when it released in 2012, felt niche compared to Sega's bigger franchises. This wasn't Sonic the Hedgehog, Golden Axe, or Streets of Rage. The Monster World series has always occupied the strange middle ground where retro enthusiasts absolutely love it, but mainstream audiences either vaguely recognize the name Wonder Boy or have never heard of these games at all. And honestly, that's exactly why this collection deserves to be talked about more in 2026. Because Sega Vintage Collection Monster World isn't just a random retro compilation, it's a time capsule showing the evolution of action RPGs, platformers, and adventure games during the late 80s and early 90s. It's also one of the better examples of how to modernize older games without stripping away what made them special in the first place. So today we're going back to Sega Vintage Collection Monster World on Xbox 360 to answer the big question: is it still worth playing in 2026? And before we dive in, if you enjoy retro gaming content, Xbox 360 retrospectives, and videos revisiting older games to see whether they still hold up today, make sure to give this video a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel, and ring the notification bell so you don't miss any videos. And if you want to go a step further and support the channel directly, you can check out my Patreon. The latest Patreon exclusive is How Long Can Video Game Franchises Keep Expanding, where I take a deep dive into how long major franchises can realistically continue before hitting creative limits, and what separates series that evolve from those that eventually fade out. Now, with all that out of the way, let's talk about Sega Vintage Collection Monster World. Released digitally on Xbox Live Arcade in 2012 and developed by M2, this collection contains 3 games: Wonder Boy and Monsterland, Wonder Boy and Monster World, and Monster World 4. Right away, one thing that made this collection important historically was the inclusion of Monster World 4, because this marked the first official Western release for the game. Prior to this collection, Western players either had to emulate it, import it, or rely on fan translations if they wanted to experience it. That matters more than some people realize, because there are so many older games trapped behind language barriers, outdated hardware, licensing issues, or regional exclusivity. For years, Monster World 4 was one of those legendary hidden gems that retro fans constantly talked about online. You'd always hear people say things like, "You need to play Monster World 4," but there wasn't an easy legal way for many players to actually do that. This collection changed that. And honestly, that alone gives this collection historical value. But what really helps the package stand out is that M2 actually put effort into it. If you played enough retro collections over the years, you know there's a huge difference between publishers who care about preservation and publishers who are just monetizing nostalgia as cheaply as possible. Some collections feel lazy immediately. You boot them up and get bare bones menus, input lag, broken audio, poor emulation, and almost no additional features. Sega Vintage Collection Monster World avoids most of these problems. The menu presentation is clean and easy to navigate. The emulation quality is strong. The games feel responsive. You get save states, replay sharing, challenge modes, online leaderboards, and achievement support. There are even visual filters and regional options depending on the title. In 2012, these features genuinely help make older games feel more approachable to newer audiences without compromising the original experience. And honestly, save states alone make a huge difference here. Because let's be real, older games could be brutal. A lot of retro titles were designed around arcade philosophies, limited continues, repetition, and punishing difficulty spikes. Modern players are used to autosaves, checkpoints every few minutes, accessibility settings, and streamlined progression systems. Going back to older games without quality of life features can sometimes feel exhausting, even if the games themselves are excellent. The save state functionality in this collection helps remove a lot of that frustration without fundamentally altering the games themselves. It allows newer players to appreciate these titles more on their own terms. Now let's talk about the individual games, because the quality of this collection really depends on how these games hold up today. Starting with Wonder Boy and Monsterland, this is probably the most difficult game in the package for modern audiences to fully appreciate. Not because it's bad, but because it absolutely feels like a product of its era. The game sits in this fascinating transitional space between arcade action platformers and what would eventually evolve into full-fledged action RPGs. You can see the foundations being built in real time. You've got equipment upgrades, hidden items, shops, armor progression, health management, and exploration mechanics layered on top of side-scrolling platforming gameplay. At the time, this was genuinely innovative, but in 2026, some aspects definitely feel rough around the edges. The controls can feel stiff, enemy placement occasionally feels unfair, difficulty spikes come out of nowhere sometimes. There's a level of trial and error design here that many modern players simply won't tolerate anymore. But despite that, there's still something undeniably charming about the game. You can feel the ambition behind it. It's historically fascinating seeing developers experiment with RPG progression mechanics inside a platformer structure long before genres become fully defined the way they are now. And honestly, even when the game becomes frustrating, I still found myself appreciating what it represented for gaming history. Moving on to Wonder Boy and Monster World, this is where things start feeling significantly more refined. The controls are smoother, the world design is more cohesive, the pacing improves dramatically, and the balance between action, exploration, and RPG mechanics feels much more polished. This is the game where the series really starts hitting its stride. The world itself feels inviting, there's a colorful, adventurous atmosphere that immediately pulls you in, towns feel cozy, the soundtrack has that classic Genesis era warmth that somehow feels nostalgic even if you didn't grow up with the game. Exploration feels rewarding without becoming overwhelming. One thing I really appreciate about Wonder Boy and Monster World is how approachable it still feels in 2026. A lot of retro games can feel intimidating to newer audiences because they rely on obscure mechanics, punishing difficulty, or outdated design philosophies. But this game manages to strike a really nice balance between simplicity and depth. Combat is straightforward but satisfying. Progression feels meaningful. Equipment upgrades genuinely matter. The game introduces new mechanics gradually enough that players can naturally adapt without constantly feeling lost. And honestly, this might be the game in the collection that modern audiences end up enjoying the most overall. Then we get to Monster World 4, which for many people is the main event here. Even now, this game still feels special. First off, visually, Monster World 4 looks fantastic. The sprite work is gorgeous, character animations are expressive and fluid, the environments are vibrant and full of personality. This is one of those retro games that reminds you pixel art can age beautifully when talented artists are behind it. But the visuals are only part of what makes the game stand out. The game stars Asha instead of the traditional Wonder Boy protagonist, and that change helps the game establish its own identity immediately. There's a stronger emphasis on adventure, puzzle solving, environmental interaction, and exploration compared to the earlier titles. The world feels imaginative in a way that many modern games struggle to replicate. There's this whimsical fantasy atmosphere throughout the entire experience that gives the game an incredible amount of charm. Whether it's the towns, enemy designs, NPC dialogue, or dungeon layouts, everything feels handcrafted with care. One thing that really surprised me when playing Monster World 4 in 2026 is just how modern some aspects of its design still feel. The pacing is excellent, the controls remain responsive, the exploration systems are intuitive, even the game's emotional tone feels distinct compared to many other retro action games. And honestly, I completely understand why this game became such a cult classic. You can clearly see why people spent years asking for an official Western release. Now obviously, this collection isn't perfect. One issue some players may have is that the games included here are still undeniably retro experiences. Even with quality of life features, they don't suddenly become modern games. There's still backtracking, there's still occasional cryptic progression, there's still some old school design philosophy that newer players may find frustrating. Another issue is the collection's availability. One of the biggest problems with Xbox 360 digital content in general is preservation. Over the years, more and more Xbox Live Arcade titles have been delisted, storefronts have changed, and digital ownership has become increasingly complicated. Sega Vintage Collection Monster World reportedly became unavailable digitally on certain storefronts after Sega delisted several older titles. And honestly, this is one of the reasons videos like this matter. Because there are so many incredible digital-only games and retro collections from the Xbox 360 era that risk disappearing entirely if people stop talking about them. The Xbox 360 generation represented this unique moment where publishers were experimenting heavily with digital preservation and retro re-releases, but many of those releases now exist in this awkward legal and accessibility limbo. Some titles never got modern ports, some remain trapped on old storefronts, some disappeared entirely. That's why collections like Sega Vintage Collection Monster World feels more important in 2026 than they did when they originally launched. Not because the games changed, but because gaming history itself is becoming harder to access legitimately. And honestly, this collection still holds up surprisingly well because the games themselves were built on strong foundations. Great art direction, memorable music, satisfying progression systems, and imaginative world design don't suddenly stop being enjoyable because graphics technology advanced. In fact, one thing I've noticed replaying older games lately is that many retro titles actually feel more focused than modern games. There's less filler, less bloat, less obsession with turning every game into a 100-hour live service experience. The Monster World games know exactly what they are trying to accomplish and don't waste your time getting there. That simplicity becomes refreshing after playing so many modern games overloaded with battle passes, microtransactions, endless tutorials, and constant monetization systems. And that's another reason why retro collections like this continue finding audiences years later. People miss games that simply want to be fun. Now, would I recommend this collection to absolutely everyone? Probably not. If you already know you dislike retro games, side-scrolling action RPGs, or older design philosophies, this probably isn't going to suddenly change your mind. But if you appreciate gaming history, love 16-bit era aesthetics, enjoy action RPGs, or simply want to experience one of Sega's most underrated franchises, then yes, I absolutely think Sega Vintage Collection Monster World is worth playing in 2026. Especially Monster World 4. That game alone justifies the collection's existence. It's creative, charming, memorable, and still genuinely fun decades later. And honestly, I think one of the coolest things about revisiting collections like this is realizing how many older games were experimenting with ideas long before modern gaming trends made them mainstream. You can see the DNA of future action RPGs, Metroidvanias, and adventure games all throughout this series. So many modern indie developers are clearly inspired by games like these, whether they realize it or not. At the end of the day, Sega Vintage Collection Monster World represents something bigger than just 3 retro games bundled together. It represents a period of gaming history, a preservation effort that actually cared about presentation, and a reminder that some older games remain timeless because strong gameplay and creative design never truly go out of style. So, is Sega Vintage Collection Monster World on Xbox 360 worth playing in 2026? Absolutely. Especially for retro gaming fans, Sega enthusiasts, and anyone interested in seeing the evolution of action RPGs firsthand. But what do you think? Did you ever play the Monster World series? Which game in the collection is your favorite? And do you think companies are doing enough to preserve older digital games before they disappear forever? Let me know in the comments below. And again, if you enjoyed this video, make sure to give it a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel, and ring the notification bell so you don't miss any videos. And if you want to go a step further and support the channel directly, you can check out my Patreon. The latest Patreon exclusive is How Long Can Video Game Franchises Keep Expanding, where I take a deep dive into how long major franchises can realistically continue before hitting creative limits, and what separates series that evolve from those that eventually fade out. Thank you all for watching. Game on.